The views and opinions expressed in this video are those of the speakers and panelists, and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ETHOS Institute for Public Christianity and its founding institutions and organization.
Is Jesus God?
Migrant workers and human rights from a Christian perspective.
Marriage and family.
ISIS presents a much bigger threat.
How do we integrate the Bible with our scientific understanding?
Are you able to actually describe and articulate clearly your own sense of purpose in life?
I am presenting on this part on the ecological crisis, and I guess some of these pictures are telling of my particular favorite animal, and it sort of exemplifies the kind of ecological crisis that we are we are facing right now. I think this is probably another more poignant picture where the polar bear has no longer any ice to hunt the animals. I begin my lecture with maybe what I usually do in my lectures at Trinity. I normally begin my lectures with a quiz. And so maybe if you could indulge me, if you could name the following animals, all right? I'm just gonna do it quick. I don't have a lot of time. Anyone would know this, if you know this animal? Okay, the next. This is yellow crab spider. Anyone knows what this is? Interestingly, this is the Neptune's cup sponge, and it is the only sponge. It is only found in Singapore. It was actually rediscovered a couple of years ago. There are now 5 Neptune's cup sponge in the waters around Singapore. Most of us should know this. This is the Sunda pangolin. And not least of all, this is a coluga, right? Incidentally, all these animals that I am showing are found in our local context in Singapore itself, right? I think one of the things that I wanted to show this is because there is a certain amount of rich biodiversity even in Singapore. I like to begin by sharing this with you, that there seems to be a growing scientific consensus that this has reached a level of global crisis proportion. Similarly, there is agreement that it is possible to mitigate the effects by simple personal actions. At the same time, there is a need for a coordinated approach from national or government in order to address the issue. Yet there are communities who deny the gravity or the veracity of the problem that we are facing today. There are also various leaders who champion an alternative perspective. Looking at this, I do not know if you know what I'm talking about. You probably think that I'm referring to the coronavirus pandemic, and that is true. But on another scale, I'm also referring to the ecological crisis that we are facing today. The coronavirus pandemic, in many ways, I think mirrors how we have approached the climate or ecological crisis. That certainly has an impact on humanity in a magnitude, I think, that dwarfs the current COVID-19 pandemic. So let me show you the slide again. If you realize this is basically the issue that we are facing at hand today, both the coronavirus pandemic as well as the ecological crisis. And if you take a look at the year so far, I think many of us look back and think that this has been a rather tumultuous year, and you are probably right, because in January, the zoonotic pandemic started in Wuhan. In February, one of the worst wildlife disasters in modern history, where nearly 3 billion animals were killed or displaced. This is in Australia itself, the bushfires. In April, we have one of the largest severe thunderstorm outbreaks in 2020 over the southeastern United States, where a total of 140 tornadoes occurred in 10 states. And in May, Super Cyclone Amphan caused extreme losses in India as well as Bangladesh, moving all the way up to southern China as well. And then in June, flooding in China along the Yangtze River, threatening the Three Gorges Dam. July, Hurricane Isaias, a Category 1 hurricane, went across the Caribbean as well as the East Coast of the United States. In August, Hurricane Laura, a Category 4 hurricane, strongest hurricane to make landfall in Louisiana. In August as well, the early start of the Californian wildfires. To date, there are about 4 million acres burnt. In September, the slow-moving Hurricane Sally floods the states of the Gulf Shores. And in September as well, Tropical Storm Beta hits southeastern Texas. This is interesting because those of you who are aware, tropical storms as well as hurricanes are named after the Greek alphabet. And when they run out of Greek alphabets, they use the Greek alphabet. They use the English alphabet first, and then after that. So we are right now into the Greek alphabet Beta. All right, so this has been a tumultuous year as we look at weather situations all across the world. But what do we make of these historical developments? How do we come here? Because I think as early as 1962, Rachel Carson wrote a seminal piece on pollution. This is her book was The Silent Spring, where she describes the ecological and biomedical consequences of unabated toxic industrial and agricultural pollution. And so she recorded this. She demonstrated how the widely used pesticides such as DDT made its way up the food chain, affecting mother's breast milk. And because of that, her research raised concerns then about humanity's impact on the physical world as well as the biosphere. So this was probably the start of an interest in the biosphere as well as ecological concerns. Carson's publication then fueled further studies and publications. In 1968, Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, which deals with population explosion, Edward Goldsmith's Blueprint for Survival became a read that people were thinking about the future of the world. In 1972, as well, Barbara Ward and René Dubois wrote the book Only One Earth. And in 1987, the Brundtland Commission basically published Our Common Future. And these publications actually started to increase a certain awareness about the situation that humanity has placed the Earth under. Question here. In which year was the first Earth Day held? I do not know if any one of you know. This actually marks the 50th year. And so the first Earth Day was held in the West because of all these public warnings, these warnings from the scientific community. It sparked a public awareness which led to campaign movements in the West, notably Earth Day. Earth Day then was organized for the first time in 1970, all across various cities in United States, starting with New York. Right, this is a photo that was taken at that point in time. It says that science is actually useful. And then this was the headlines for the New York Times, where millions joined Earth Day's observance across the nation. All right, I think if we compare what was happening in 1970 and 50 years later, things seem to be very different. Earth Day then inspired 20 million Americans, 10% of the population at that point in time, to take to the streets and parks and auditoriums and to demonstrate against the impacts of 150 years of industrial development, which has left a growing legacy of serious human health impacts. And so the first Earth Day led to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency and various other environmental laws, including the National Environmental Education Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, as well as the Endangered Species Act. So this resulted in a lot of legislations that helped curb the seriousness of the problems that America faced. But on a more global basis, in 1972, the United Nations then organized a conference in Stockholm on the theme of ecological stewardship. And so the UN declaration stated, "A point has been reached in history where we must shape our actions throughout the world with a more prudent care for the environmental consequences. through ignorance and indifference, we can do massive and irreversible harm to the earthly environment on which our life and well-being depends. Right? This was a declaration made by the United Nations in 1972. And from the initial meeting birthed several regional and international meetings, most notably the Earth Summits, which was held once every decade. Starting in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, in 2002 in Johannesburg, and again going back to Rio de Janeiro in 2012. The United Nations also set up various international scientific bodies to look at the stewardship of the planet, and this includes the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is the body that is responsible for publication of various scientific studies. 1994, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and in 2011, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystems. All right, so these were some of the developments, at least from United Nations. But since these developments, there has been many, I would say not many, but really countless reports alerting humanity to the ecological crisis with even greater urgency. And one of the earliest admonishments came in 1992 in a publication entitled The World Scientist's Warning to Humanity. This document was signed by 1,700 of the world's leading scientists, including 104 Nobel laureates, where they admonish human beings and the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage to the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of the current practices put at serious risk the future that we wish for human society and the plant and animal kingdoms, and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. We, the undersigned senior members of the world scientific community, hereby warn all humanity of what lies ahead. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and the life on it is required if vast human misery is to be avoided and our global home on this planet is not irretrievably mutilated. This was the warning issued in 1992. The group of scientists has since issued a second notice of the warning in 2017, and in 2019, a further update in the scientists' warning of a climate emergency. So we really live in a very, very tumultuous times, right? In 2010, a group of 255 members of the United States National Assembly of Scientists wrote to the Congress with a caution. Society has two choices. We can ignore the science and hide our heads in the sand and hope we are lucky, or we can act in the public interest to reduce the threat of global climate change quickly and substantively. All right, so that's what he wrote, but I think Christopher Wright rightly noted, only a willful blindness worse than the proverbial ostrich head in the sand can ignore the facts of environmental destruction and its accelerating pace. Incidentally, I think you should know that the ostrich puts its head in the sand, not because it's hiding, but really it is turning its eggs. It's a female ostrich and male ostrich that does it, so that the egg is evenly warmed up as it hatches, because ostriches don't build nests, all right? What are the features of the ecological crisis? And that's why we read a lot of things about climate change. We read a lot of things about plastic pollution. Through this, I hope to give us some sense of some better way to understand this. We see that there are these various different features of the ecological crisis. First and foremost is climate change, ozone depletion, air pollution, water pollution, depletion of fresh water, land contamination, deforestation, soil erosion and degradation, land use and habitat loss, and not least of all, loss of biodiversity. So these 10 things, which I will now go through quickly, it really is the issue that is at hand that sort of earmarks for us the kind of ecological crisis that we are facing. First of all, climate change. This refers to the anthropogenic causes of climate change due to pollution of the atmosphere by greenhouse gases and other contaminants. It largely occurs as a result of combustion of fossil fuels, emissions from agriculture and pastoralism, and the destruction and clearance and burning of forests. All right. So, such as, I think if you do drive a car, you own a car, CO2 emissions is a direct result of car ownership and car use. All right. Increase of consumption of beef. All right. The fact is that beef is now much more accessible, and we eat a lot more beef than maybe 20 years ago. This has led to the sort of a corresponding amount of methane emission every time the beef eats and then basically lets out air. Thirdly, the increase of palm oil-based products, which leads to a lot of this deforestation. All right, and you'll be surprised the amount of palm oil we use in most of our products. And that really causes some of our haze that we see in July and August every year. All right, so that's climate change. Ozone depletion, this refers to the depletion of stratosphere's ozone as a result of pollution by the halocarbons, all right? And the lack of protective ozone at high altitudes results really in increased level of harmful solar ultraviolet radiation, which reaches the Earth's surface, causing a range of health-related as well as ecological issues. And I think that's where we sort of, this is probably a positive thing, because the discovery of the ozone hole over Antarctica in the mid-1980s resulted then in the 1987 Montreal Protocol, which began then to phase out the use of CFCs, right? And by 2005, consumption of ozone depleting chemicals had fallen by 90 to 95%. So this gives us hope that there is something that we can do if we do things together to try to address the ecological issue, all right? Thirdly, air pollution. Many air pollutants are responsible for the degradation of air quality, but some key pollutants include particulate matter such as soot, tropospheric ozone, oxides of nitrogen, oxides of sulfur, lead, and various aromatic compounds such as benzene. By aromatic, I do not mean perfume, but really it has to do with carbon chain compounds, all right? Many air pollutants may cause or aggravate respiratory or cardiovascular illnesses. Some are carcinogenic, and some may cause damage to vegetation, and in turn produce a range of ecological effects. Think, for example, urbanization and industrialization leads to a whole lot of air pollution. And I think that's what we have seen in this current COVID situation, where there was a lockdown, and people have been reporting that they can actually see Mount Everest from Delhi. The air is actually clear in Los Angeles because of the closure of production. All right, so I think this is one of the maybe the plus points of the COVID pandemic. Also, Southeast Asia's haze situation is one of those examples of air pollutants. So there is a sort of a connection as well. This is basically data that was polled in 2016, where it shows us where are the highest pollution of air in various different megacities. And it's probably not very surprising to find that New Delhi in India tops the charts. All right. This gives you another sort of a chart on air pollution as the greatest human health risk. So if you take a look at particulate pollution, it reduces your lifespan by about 1.8 years. All right. So this sort of tells us the kind of situation that most of us are faced with. Similarly, there is also water pollution. Water quality may be degraded because of contamination by pollutants, giving rise to a range of health-related and ecological effects as well. Many other human activities lead to water pollution, such as oil spills, accumulation of plastics, and bioaccumulation of persistent organic chemicals, and some of the other causes of serious degradation. So also, ocean acidification and the loss of coral reefs, I think that is a direct result of water pollution. Also, plastic pollution is one example of water pollution. All right, so if you've been following the news on climate change and issues like this, you probably read about plastic pollution. That is only a small aspect of the ecological crisis that we are facing today. All right. So let me talk about, and let me just give you an example. This is China's Dystopian Lake, Baotou Lake, which is in somewhere in the middle of China. This is a lake that is caused by probably you and I because of our constant desire to want to change our mobile phones. And so this is the place where they build the batteries for mobile phones, and guess where all that water goes into. So this is a lake that has no life at all. Nothing lives in this lake. This was reported in 2015 as the worst place on Earth. All right. You've probably seen this picture as well. Quiz question, how long does it take for a plastic bottle to disintegrate in the sea? Some of you might know this answer. Quickly, I probably would have to tell you that it is 450 years. All right, because if you take a look at the rate of plastic dissolving in the ocean, it will take 450 years for your bottle of tea or your bottle of drink to basically disintegrate. All right, and it does not totally disintegrate. It just crumbles into smaller pieces of fine plastic, which will end up in our own bodies as well. All right, so this basically tells us the kind of situation we're faced with. If you take a look at the amount of rubbish we throw and the amount of rubbish that ends up in marine polluting the seas. All right. I think these are some resources. If I could ask for you to take a cue to maybe watch some of these interesting documentaries on Plastic Paradise, the Plastic Ocean, especially Chasing Coral if you're on Netflix. It tells you about the state in which the corals are being degraded on a daily basis. It's a frightening video, actually. So depletion of fresh water is another aspect. Besides pollution of freshwater sources, there are now various other sources which would affect this. We think of the Cape Town water crisis in 2019, where they almost shut down all the water supply for a few days because they had run out of water. We also think of the Australian and Californian forest fires, which is a result of the depletion of freshwater supplies. All right. Also, to continue land contamination, the land is contaminated as a result of chemical and reactive pollutants, and this causes profound ecological effects. It sort of presents severe constraints on future development. We think of the Chernobyl events as well as the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disasters, right? So much so that I think nothing grows on that land even up till now. We think also of plastic waste in landfills. Let me show you this diagram or this picture. National Geographic has this report to make of the 8.3 billion metric tons that have been produced. 6.3 billion metric tons has become plastic waste. Of that, only 9% has been recycled. The vast majority, 79%, is accumulating in landfills or sloughing off in the natural environment as litter. All right, I think that's one reason why we should not use too much plastics, right? There's also the issue of deforestation, the permanent removal of trees to make room for something besides the forest. And this can include clearing the land for agriculture, for pastoral farming, using the timber for fuel, construction, manufacturing. It is estimated that half of the world's mature forests have been cleared by humans. And while forest covers only about 30% of the Earth's surface, they are an essential part of the global ecosystem and the biosphere. They help to regulate climate, they protect soils from erosion, and they provide habitats for a vast number of plant and animal species. This shows you the rate of deforestation. It's actually decreasing in Brazil, but of late in 2015 onwards up to this current year, the deforestation is increasing again because the Brazilian government is clearing land to produce soya beans as well as to produce more cattle for beef in this part of the world. All right, this is the deforestation in Amazon. You notice that it is on the rise. 2018 and 2019, it was actually on the decrease, but since then it is now on the rise. And this shows you the record number of wildfires that are burning in the Amazon because of some of these clearing as well. All right, so we really live in very troubling times. This is the effect of soil erosion and degradation as well. Part of that is that all that is degraded goes into the river. The fish is affected. Degraded lands often are less able to hold on to water, which is why we read about a lot of all these floodings all over the world because of soil degradation. The degradation may also result in desertification, transforming habitable land into deserts. And I'm not trying to be an alarmist here, but take a look at the amount of land that is sort of being contaminated, all right, by all these different users. And this is a picture of the desertification of Africa. If you take a look at it, the range of the Sahara Desert is growing wider as well as reaching to the southern states as well. All right, so this paints a rather dismal picture, right? The growth of human population and urbanization has also changed land use. This overlaps with deforestation, where land is cleared. And then you build basically new roads, drainage of wetlands, and destruction and removal of coastal mangrove has impacted a lot of places. According to World Wildlife Fund, around half of the world's original forests have disappeared, and they are still being removed at a rate 10 times higher than the possible level of regrowth, right? Not least of all, and last point here, loss of diversity. Many plants and animal species are threatened with extinction due to the destruction and degradation of their habitats, due to direct exploitation, due to direct illegal wildlife trade, as well as the food and pet industries. Well, biodiversity loss effectually threatens the health of the ecosystem. It leads to things such as food wastage, as well as the case of overfishing. There is a book called For Fish. It's written by ichthyologists that is saying that there are 4 different kinds of fish that is dying out because of overfishing, because we are the ones doing the consumption. And then there is a link between the loss of biodiversity as well as the increase of zoonotic diseases such as dengue, as well as the novel coronavirus. This is an article that was found in the Business Times, so I encourage you to take a look at that as well. Quiz question. These are 2 of the last of their own species. These are the last 2 of their species of rhino. I do not know if you know these. There are only 2 of this left in the world. They are the northern white rhino. All right, and these last 2 happen to be 2 females, a mother and a daughter. I guess in a couple of years' time, we will never see the northern white rhino again. This gives you a sense of in which the number of endangered species is on the rise. It has been on the rise since the time of when they were recorded. Started at 7,800. Now there are like 14,000 species that are now endangered. All right. So what leads to biodiversity loss? These are some of the primary drivers, which again interacts with the 10 causes that I have, 10 features of ecological crisis that I'm highlighting here. All right. One really good production that was done recently is David Attenborough's Extinction: The Facts. If you're on BBC, I would encourage you to be able to sort of view this 1-hour documentary. All right, so basically this is what I've highlighted, these 10 issues, these 10 features of ecological crisis. But if we were to sort of take a look at this, the common denominator here is humanity. All right, the common denominator is humanity. How do we get here? Well, the term Anthropocene suggests that human activity is largely responsible for affecting and accelerating these changes. Human activities are indeed affecting the whole of creation, making it possible to speak of a geologic age of our own making. This is Refkin saying that if we think of geologic ages, we are now writing our own history, all right? And this is further exacerbated by the exponential increase in human population. This gives you a sense of how human population has grown since the 180. All right, it has grown tremendously. And because the exponential growth in human population has many ways expansively magnified the gravity of the current ecological crisis. While we affirm the scriptural view of flourishing of human life, Douglas Moo in his book says we must confront the reality that our influence can too often dishonor our Creator and Lord. All right, we take that to heart. And this is where I think in the environment and Christian ethics, Northcote has this to say: there is not a stretch of ocean or very few areas of forest which do not show signs of the industrial and commercial transformation of the earth into a materials bank for human exploitation. The extent of human interference and disruption of natural systems can be measured 3 miles above the North Pole in the loss of protective ozone, and 1 mile deep in the rift valleys of the ocean floor and the polluted sediments, which trickle down from the waste products of modern consumerism. Meaning that you can actually find plastic waste as deep as the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean in our world. So everywhere you go, you can actually find the footprints of human destruction. This deliberate destruction of our common home is what Kurian Tadam refers to as oikos, the killing of our own home. And it has both physical as well as theological implications. Honestly, I tend to be less optimistic when I survey the current plight of our world. All right, but Mu is right when he noted, at the end of the day, despite whatever might be new or unprecedented in our context, our task remains the most ancient of ones: careful working and keeping of the earth. All right, let me say that again: careful working and keeping of the earth. In many ways, I think I see the current coronavirus pandemic as a prelude to the connected and more complex ecological crisis. It is but a prelude. Right? Thankfully, we have not only science to guide us, we also have scripture and theology. Right? And we need to hear afresh what the word of the Lord has to teach us. And this is where we need to get back to a biblical perspective of creation. This is where one of my supervisors, Howard Snyder, noted evangelical theology often begins with Genesis 3 rather than Genesis 1. All are sinners in need of God's saving grace. That's what Genesis 3 says. But biblical theology does not begin with sin. It begins with creation. Right? And Christopher Wright explicates this. All I'm trying to do here is to encourage evangelicals to read their whole Bibles and to see the great arc that spans from Genesis 1:2 to Revelation 21:22, and to take Ephesians 1:9-10 and Colossians 1:15-20 with full seriousness. For there it is clear that Paul sees personal redemption within a staggeringly cosmic and universal framework. So personal redemption is really a movement within the cosmic and universal framework. And Wright continues, creation shares in the effect of humanity's sin, but we human beings get to share in the fullness of creation's redemption. And it is the right way around to put it: we get saved along with creation, and not that we get saved out of creation, right? Take note of that. We get saved along with creation, not that we get saved out of creation. God's intention is to redeem that whole of creation, and we can be a part of that, and in so doing, become a part of the new creation. Sandra Richter also noted that Christians readily recognize the disastrous effects of the fall in the garden, but rarely, it seems, do we as Christians reflect on the effect of humanity's rebellion on the garden. Right? Take note of those two in the garden, but we very seldom take note of the effects on the garden. And rarely, it seems, do we consider how the reality of redemption in our lives should redirect our attitude and actions toward the same. And with that, I think I want to say that I'm glad to have this opportunity to do so, to reflect on what can we do about humanity's rebellion on the garden. And I think this is a step in the right direction. Okay, some resources I could sort of refer you to would be these books. If you have time, purchase them and read them. These are the other DVDs that I think would be very helpful in helping us understand the ecological crisis. I close with the final stanza of the hymn, This is my Father's will. It says, "This is my Father's will, oh, let me never forget that though the wrong seems oft so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's will, why should my heart be sad? Because the Lord is King, let the heavens ring, God reigns, let the earth be glad." I think it ties in with the kind of doxological response that we should have with regards to God and his creation. Thank you.